It's a classic look and it makes me feel like a fucking astronaut. Welcome to Wrist Swap, I'm Harrison. I want to tell you real quick why the Omega Speedmaster Moonwatch is the second watch of my perfect 3-watch collection and why I've held on to it now for almost a year. When I say I feel like an astronaut, let me clarify. I don't mean someone that's going to go up in a rocket tomorrow. What I mean is that in the 60s, they gave out free cars to the astronauts at the time because they were like rock stars. And when I wear this, I feel like a rock star driving a Corvette. If you've seen my other video, I'll put it up there. At one point in time, I sold my entire collection to buy a Rolex Explorer. That was my only watch for a year, and I created a lot of memories with it. I eventually started looking at trying to create the perfect 3-watch collection. I haven't fully done that yet, but I think I've found the perfect second piece for my collection. I bought my Omega Speedmaster Moonwatch last July from Moyer Fine Jewelers in Carmel, Indiana, because they're my local AD for Omega here in Indianapolis. I bought it brand new, the Hesalite version. At the time, it was $6,300, now $6,400. What I had been on the hunt for was for a watch that it was a little bit more of a classic look, something that jumped out and gave a little bit more wrist presence without being loud and obnoxious on my wrist. I like versatile watches. I like a watch that I could wear out on the street wearing shorts and a t-shirt, as well as wearing a nice suit, and I could put it on and it's not gonna look like a JLC gold moon phase or anything like that, but it will be a nice piece that will still fit into the overall aesthetic, and I rarely wear a suit. It's gonna be a watch that you recognize, you enjoy, and has a whole lot of history to it. I'm gonna pop the specifications up, but I'm not gonna go through them in detail. Most people know what the Moonwatch specifications are. What I do wanna talk about is why I picked this one over the other ones that I was looking at in the store. And I'll give you a general idea of how I got there. I wanted something that was more classic, and so I looked at an Omega Speedmaster Moonwatch, as most people do. And when I was looking at it, what I really wanted was a vintage piece. I wanted one that was from the 70s or 80s. I wanted the patina. I wanted the look and the feel of that era. And so when I went down to Moyer, what I started looking at is they had a 1980s version of a Speedmaster that was vintage. It looked fantastic. The patina was still intact. The patina was still on the hands. I don't have a picture of it, but it was a beautiful watch. What I loved most about it was the script, Speedmaster, written on it. For whatever reason, the font was a little different on that than it is on the newer models now, and I absolutely loved it. I actually bought that watch while I was there, and I brought it home and I was wearing it and I was thinking about it. I knew that I was probably going to change out the bracelet for a different bracelet because it was a pressed fold over clasp and it didn't have a lock on it. And so I was worried that it would come undone and I would drop this vintage, irreplaceable watch. Plus, I have a big love for innovations, especially technologically. And so George Daniels' co-axial movement was something that was very interesting to me, especially when I started reading his book, Watchmaking, where he talks about the co-axial movement, making it, why he made it that way, angles, that sort of thing. It goes in way more depth than I need to. But I was interested in the technological innovation from the traditional standard Swiss lever escapement. So I was interested in the newer 3861 that had just come out. So I went back and I asked Bill, I said, look, I'd like to trade this back in and just go ahead and buy the new model. And he said, well, which one? Are you looking for the model with the 1861 that they were phasing out or the 3861? And so he handed me both those and I was staring at them, and what I noticed first, especially in their lighting there, was the step dial of the 3861. It's minor. And as you guys know, especially when you listen to me or a lot of people that are interested in watches, we're very nitpicky. We find the smallest details to talk about and make them more of a big deal than they really are, like the dot over 90, for example, which I didn't care about. But the step dial for me stood out. It was different, it was unique, it had an extra layer of depth to the dial. The subdials looked like they were more recessed, like they had these chamfers that dropped down to the base of each subdial, rather than when I looked at the older one, at least in that lighting, it looked like they were just cut in, like it was just a flat drop of the subdial in terms of depth. And so this looked like it had more of that going on. And then the real selling point for me was the bracelet. It wore a lot better than the other Speedmaster that they had there. And so this was the watch that I went with. So I bought the 3861, I came home and I immediately then started wearing it around. But that lasted about a week. After a week, I put it back in the box and I waited. And this is the hard part. If you guys have ever bought a watch brand new and you're anything like me, you have a hard time putting those first few scratches in it. I like buying them used because they already have some scratches in it. I don't have to worry about it. So I put it back in a box and I started thinking about, well, did I want the sapphire version? Did I want this? I had classic buyer's remorse where I kept thinking about the other things I could have gotten instead. And so it actually took me probably about 2 months and my wife's pushing to get me to finally start wearing it. I switched it onto one of these Tropic straps. This is from Tropic Strap, and when I put it on, the watch changed completely. I didn't have to worry about scratching the bracelet, so that was half of the equation that I didn't have to worry about anymore. So now it was just the case and the crystal. So I was gentle with it for a little while, and then I started wearing it almost every day, and then I started wearing it every day. And then this became the piece that I wore more often than my Explorer, which I love, but for whatever reason, the Speedmaster just became more of the piece that I would reach for, at least during that period of time. The other reason why I picked the 3861 over the 1861, there were 2 other reasons. One was that I really like having a precise watch. Again, I know that a quartz watch is more precise, more accurate, easier to handle, less expensive to service. I know all of that. And we, as watch people, know that these are emotional things for us. I know that it's not going to be perfectly precise, but what I liked was that I could hack the seconds. So that I knew when I set the time, I could set it to the second and that it would be accurate. Rather than try and figure out how to wind it backwards like you do with Seikos to stop the seconds hand to get it to follow the correct time down to the second. Again, useless. I know in a day or in a few hours, it's going to be off by a second. But that's what I like. I like setting the time, at least at that moment, precisely. Another big selling point for the 3861 for a lot of people is the METAS certification. I can do a full video on METAS and exactly what that means, but generally what I liked was that they had moved not only to a coaxial escapement, so I wouldn't have to service it nearly as often, but also how they switched to a silicone hairspring and a free sprung balance, which means that I'm going to have a more accurate timekeeper that's resistant to magnetic fields. And I can talk a little bit about silicon and that sort of thing. Let me know if you want a full video on METAS and exactly why Omega uses it and why they can hit those qualifications. And some other people probably could as well. One of the largest pieces there is the silicon hairspring. So if you're interested in the Speedmaster, let me give you a few pieces of advice and a few things that I've heard other people talk about and my impressions of them. One is the fact that the bezel sits above the case a little bit. I've heard some people complain about crud basically getting in underneath where that bezel stops and right before the case, underneath that like UFO style bezel, or if that's how it's called. And I will tell you from my experience over the last almost year of wearing it, I don't have anything in there. And I haven't used a toothpick to clean it out or anything like that. Mine just doesn't have anything in there. The other people are concerned about is the aluminum bezel and the fact that that bezel sits the way that it does. It's more prone to getting nicked, knocked, dinged, all that sort of thing. And yes, that is a common concern, and that's something that you can be worried about if you're worried about damaging your watches severely because you think you might pass them on or sell them on or whatever. I get that. I will tell you that I have worn this again for about a year, and I go into construction, into warehouses, all sorts of things, pick up boxes, move them, screw things down, and I haven't dinged it yet. Now granted, that's luck, but what I can tell you is that if you're interested in wearing this and it's a piece you think you're gonna have for a long time, just wear it. The worst thing you can do is get it and be like me, put it in a box, never wear it, and so then you kind of decide, I don't really like the piece, and then sell it on. The other 2 pieces people often talk about with this model are the sharp edges and the water resistance. Now, 50 meters, in theory, I could scuba with this watch and it would be perfectly fine. Now granted, the way that they pressure test these, especially with METAS certification, is they put it in water and then they put it at 50 meters worth of water pressure. So that gives you an idea of if it's stagnant in that water and it has that much pressure, exactly how much it can handle in terms of water infiltration. What I will say is that when you're moving in the water, you can create more pressure temporarily on the watch, which is why typically you'll have watch companies rate it for lower or recommend you use them in lower water capacities than you'll find at exactly 50 meters. So could this be submerged at 50 meters and be fine? Yes. Can I swim with it at 50 meters? Probably no, because I would probably push beyond the gaskets with those temporary increases in pressure. I will not tell you to do that, because if you knock the crown or knock one of the pushers especially, you've immediately allowed water into the movement. So I don't swim with it, but I don't baby it. I wear it in the kitchen, I wear it in the rain. It doesn't matter to me because the water isn't going to get into the case as long as I check the gaskets regularly. The sharp edges on the bracelet. Now, I will tell you from my experience, yes, the edges are a little sharp. They're not sharp like a razor blade, and they're not sharp like a putty knife, but what they're sharp like is basically a perfect 90-degree angle, which means that you don't have a bevel or a chamfer there in order to kind of break that edge. You have something that's pretty stout. That's a 90-degree angle. And so what that means is that when you put on the bracelet, for the first few months that I had it, I noticed it. I could feel it. And whether over time my oils in my skin have kind of knocked that edge down, or I'm used to it, I don't notice it anymore. It doesn't bother me. I had the same complaint with the sides of the cases, but nowadays I haven't thought about that in about 2 or 3 months. So clearly it's a non-issue now, and I'm not exactly sure why I feel differently now than I did before, but either way. Generally, those are my thoughts, impressions, and feelings on my Omega Speedmaster Moonwatch. Those are the reasons why I originally got it. The reasons why I'm keeping it, it's a classic look. It's something that I can't take off. When I look at it down on my wrist, or I think about the watch and the design, it makes me feel like an astronaut in the 60s. I said that in my other video, but it makes me feel like that. And so at the moment, the Omega Speedmaster isn't going anywhere. It is the second piece of my current perfect 3-watch collection. Do me a favor and subscribe. Like this video if you like my commentary of this style as opposed to a traditional review. Next week, I'm gonna do a review on the Seiko Turtle and why I think it's a solid, cool beater watch. Till then, take care.